Wonderful. Welcome to our third webinar in a series around communication and education today. We are going into more depth today about how we communicate in schools and the benefit of engaged communication. I am happy to introduce our presenters today, Mr. Ryan Miller and our own Bloomz CEO, Chax. Ryan Miller comes to us from Redding, California as a principal of a K-5 grade elementary school. He has been in education for over 10 years and understands the views of education from the teacher's point of view, as well as the administrative point of view. We also have Chax with us today, who comes with a wealth of experience in a global industry business back end and is the founder and CEO of Bloomz. His background includes computer science and engineering. He has a personal stake invested in Bloomz, and I hope he shares that today, why he built Bloomz. We thank you for coming in here and joining us today. And I would like to share that we are open to questions and answers in the question and answer area. So please ask your questions and we'll get those answered for you. And we're very excited to continue our webinar series with our third installment. And we will continue this in 2022 as we are discussing the importance of education today. I'm going to go ahead and hand off our discussion as soon as I share our points that we are going to discuss today. So Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to start our conversation about the bridging between schools and parents for communication. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys. So excited to be here and talk about a subject that I'm pretty passionate about, which is communication. And this is just a great quote there, that good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. And I think that now more than ever within the context of our times, but even outside of the pandemic, communication is just such an area that schools need to emphasize and master in order to create a healthy school community. Parents need to be brought in. We need to have stakeholders be let in the loop as we are building our school culture, and communication has to be kind of a bedrock of that. And I think there was if I remember correctly, there was a little cartoon after this that we put in there that we had added in, and this was, I'm sure many teachers have seen this, but I like to use this cartoon to kind of go a little bit deeper than just what's there. But of course, 1960, these grades are terrible, and it's the parents to the kids, and then these grades are terrible, and the parents and the kids to the teacher. But what's funny about this is I think that there actually is some things that you can pull out of this cartoon, which is that maybe in those earlier iterations, back in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s, that the conversation wasn't as developed as it should have been, and the conversations now aren't maybe as developed as they should be, right? So really, should parents be going to the teacher and saying, these grades are terrible, what's going on? Well, maybe not in an angry way, but I think there is a conversation that needs to be had about, well, why is little Billy struggling? And should parents be going to little Billy and be like, these grades are terrible, or asking, hey, what's going on with your grades? And we need to create that bridge between what's happening at school and what's happening at home. And I always talk about it within the context of my school as a partnership. Really, if that partnership is not happening between home and school, then really we're failing our kids, because we have those kids for 6.5 hours a day, but parents have them the rest of the time, and over summer and the weekends, and we have to be in a relationship where we balance each other out and are able to reinforce the things that are happening at school at home, and really make sure that we have that partnership. That's why our district invests a lot in not only in parent communications but parent classes, so we're reinforcing the same values, same value system, same goals for our students. So I know it's kind of a funny cartoon, but the reality is that clarity might have solved both in the 1960s, and now clarity is what solves those problems, because parents should be questioning why, if their kid's getting an F, why is their kid getting an F? And is that not necessarily the teacher's fault? And that's not what I'm saying, but there is something that's happening where we need to communicate and figure out what's going on to make sure that our students are getting the benefit of things.
So if it's okay, I want to jump in here, Ryan, just to share. I mean, I acknowledge everything that you said and relates to my own personal experience. This is just kind of the impetus for me to even get started with Bloomz. This was back in 2013 when, I was just moved from another company where I was leading their product and partnerships. And then I wanted to do something in the education space. But then just as soon as a month later, I felt sick. This was an extended period of time. I'm telling from a parent perspective, but you can relate to exactly the scenario that you talk about. My two kids at the time, my daughter was moved from a private school into a public school. She was a smart kid, and she got into what we call the Quest program, which is a high ability program. And then my son just started in a preschool, but both of them were going to two different schools. And this is back in 2012, 2013 timeframe. And it was a challenge to stay connected. Talking about email being the only way. And what happened was that during the same time, I fell sick with some complications that really immobilized my ability to move around for almost a 9-month period. And during that same time, almost every other day, we were going to the hospitals, trying to figure out what was the cause of this. I had double visions and some complications that really could not let me even drive around. So we needed a way to stay connected with what's happening around my kids because we didn't want them to be affected. We needed the support of the community. We needed to really understand what is important for these kids so that they get to progress. It was so interesting, almost like 7 months into the 9 months, we didn't even know that my daughter wasn't even submitting homeworks. So this is, 7 months passed, and she was a smart kid, and she moves in. Apparently, she was getting, some challenges, potentially bullied by other kids as she moved into the new school, and the teacher had no way to communicate with us easily, and we didn't have an easy way to stay connected. So you can see how just the lack of communication and the lack of that visibility almost affected her confidence and ability to really stay on top of what's important for her own progress. But as parents, we failed to give her the supporting environment. So I just wanted to kind of connect the dots that parenting in today's world is even more challenging because we're all busy. And something comes up on my phone, my attention is driven away from what is important for the kids. And if I don't have something actionable, it can easily lead into disengagement and lack of support for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bobby, thanks for bringing up the slide. I think it's, and I was not in the educational space in the 1960s. I hadn't been born yet, but I think there's definitely this establishment of what we call two-way communication in schools, and we prioritize that two-way communication, which is to say that we're not just giving information to our school community or our parents, but we want to develop that communication, that back and forth. Here's what we're seeing. What are you seeing? How can we partner together? And that kind of that juxtaposes what we used to see in the past, which was, hey, here's what's happening. Now you're responsible for it. And we back off. Well, that's not really, as schools now, we're talking about the whole child. We're talking about, and really the goals now of schools are not just in academics. We talk about social emotional learning. We talk about communication abilities, and we work with conflict management and so many things to teach the whole child, that it has changed the dynamics of what are happening in school. So it increases that need for communication, because we're not just talking about whether a kid's getting an A, B, C, D, or F in a class. Now we're talking about how are they handling things emotionally? How are they handling peer relationships? How are they communicating their needs? What are their, a big thing right now, what's their ACE score, which has to do with adverse childhood experiences, and how can we support them? And the avenue in which we are able to partner is communication, is being able to tell our parents, this is what we're seeing versus what you're seeing. And yeah, it's the lack of clarity that creates chaos and frustration. You know, we have to clarify to our parents. So our parents have to know where we're coming from as a school, and we have to know where the parents are coming from as a school. And not always are we necessarily going to agree, but as long as there's clarity, we can understand what the problem is. And I think as a school administrator, as a teacher, it was always, you know, okay, I just need clarification on what the issue is, and then we can create a strategy on how to address it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So looking at parent expectations and engaged community. So you were just talking a little while ago how things have changed, and this our current world moves a bit faster than what it had, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I know now, you know, parent expectations, we are in an age of instantaneous gratification, right? You know, so like if we were joking before I hopped on, and my wife did text me and say that she heard me joking about Amazon, about, you know, just the miracle it was when my wife gave me the Amazon password on our Amazon account, and all I had to do was swipe one way and I bought something and it showed up to the door 2 days later. We're in that instant gratification culture. But what that also means is we're in a time where, you know, parents are expecting pretty instantaneous feedback. Just this morning, I was talking to my secretaries about how when I was in school, my parents got the report card at the end of the semester, and that's what everything was based on. Like I got one report card for 4.5 months worth of work, and everything came down to whatever letter grades I had on that. Now, schools have changed since then. It's not just necessarily based in letter grades. We have all these different paradigms of success, but it also is now, you know, we're not just waiting until the 11th hour and this is the end. Now we want to, as parents, okay, what is my kid doing on Tuesday? What is my kid doing on Wednesday? What's the class plan for next week? When's the next field trip? How can I volunteer? What's my child's behavior on a random day of the week? And so, you know, really now parents are expecting more communication, more feedback. I think, you know, as a principal, I'm always looking for ways that I can utilize different tools to engage my parent community, you know, videos or, you know, podcasts, or you know, it's not just the parent phone call anymore. It's not just the note home, you know, in a child's backpack. There's a lot of different ways, and one of the ways we have at Alta Mesa, the K-5 we work at, we utilize Bloomz for all our teachers, in that as a way for our teachers to give that instantaneous feedback on how the kids are behaving throughout the day. And that's been one of the things that we've experienced as a positive at our school, was the ability for parents to see how their kids are progressing through the day behaviorally. You know, they use the little eggs and they're trying to hatch the eggs, and all of those positive reinforcers that Bloomz has created has been a great thing for our teachers. And then on top of that, we've talked about how it's also created an ability for them to give feedback on a daily basis, behavior reports. Hey, here's how little Billy did today, you know, at this assignment, you know, and then parents can ask questions back with that. Okay, hey, you know, if he's struggling with this, what can I do at home to reinforce what you're doing at school? And then it's also created some documentation, which is always a principal's best friend is documentation.
This would have been a great way for me. I mean, at that time, imagine my daughter wasn't submitting things on time, or she wasn't actively participating. If only we had that kind of visibility, you know, I can relate to. I mean, this is why when we started building Bloomz, it was really a purpose-driven and mission-driven approach for me, particularly, because we could relate to every problem that we were trying to solve here. And before Bloomz, I would say, you know, most of the emphasis was more around just the teacher and maybe some student. And I think with the Bloomz is really, we put the parent as the front and center. You know, that has been kind of the fundamental shift in the way that we looked at it. Because, you know, going back to my own experience, I was already on Facebook, I was on LinkedIn and many other social media tools by then. So anything else, I could instantly get updates. But here, when our kids are spending, you know, as you said, like 6 to 8 hours a day, and then but even then the rest of their consciousness is revolving around what's happening in the schools. So it's important that we have visibility. So I'm glad to see that your school is taking advantage of some of those different modes of communication, particularly the behavior being one of them. So, and maybe one question I had, Ryan, you might be talking about is like, there's different types of communication. I think you touched upon it, right? So would you mind maybe elaborating a little bit about how you think about these different types of communications that happen at various levels, and then how they play into how schools should be planning, or how they should be handling all the way across the board? If I'm jumping across the way and you are already planning to talk about it, I'm happy to wait.
Yeah, we can jump to that, definitely, Chaks, and those are some great conversations that I have some slides for. Can I ask a real quick question first before we get there? That's really around this two-way street. As we're talking about the benefits of communication and the two-way street, and we're talking about parents, because we were talking about the parents being involved in that. What are the benefits of the responsibility being distributed now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's where it comes back to that conversation of a partnership, and again, kind of leaning on maybe stereotypes of past education, where it was, hey, you take my kid for 6.5 hours, and then I take my kid for the rest of the time, and it's two separate entities. Like, you do your thing, you let me know how my kid's doing, and then I'll do my thing. And now we're talking about that's not really the healthiest thing, because we have to be on the same page as a school. So when we're sending home behavior reports, or we're saying this is what the kid's struggling with academically, we need you to read with your child at night, and here's some exercises or things you can do. It's really been one of those things where parents realize that ultimately, while the school is has a huge responsibility for a child's education, and I would say the lion's share of the responsibility is we're professional educators, that parents have a huge hand in that as well. That we have school for 180 school days a year out of 365, and we're with kids for 6.5 hours a day, plus maybe some bonus time for intervention and stuff after school. So there's a vast amount of time that parents have their children and are responsible for that. So they have to take the time, and in an age right now where we have a lot of families where both parents are working, to be able to streamline and communicate efficiently what those needs are is really important. So, as we see parents have to take on that responsibility, and then that partnership gets created, right? So now all of a sudden we're no longer two entities taking care of two different things. Oh, I'm taking care of the home front, and you're taking care of the school front. Now we're utilizing both our strengths to teach the whole child, and realize that the lessons that a student is being taught at home in that time is extremely valuable as well.
So there's one statistic that, as I was looking into solving this problem, there's one statistic that I have come across. This is over 3 decades of research that shows that even if, let's say, you have the best teachers and you have highly motivated students, if you do not have highly engaged parents, we're talking about engaged parents means they have invested their commitment to the success of the child, not necessarily forcing them or anything. It's to extend that learning environment at home and to give them the support as they need, as they're maturing in their learning process. So apparently, on a scale of 4 GPA, it can have either a 2.4 GPA positive impact or negative impact. So that means, like, over time, if the parent is not engaged, even a most motivated kid over time will lose the interest potentially. So this is data over 3 decades. So when I saw that one, it was very clear that the parent engagement and parent involvement is almost like on or off switch for a child to do well or not well. So it felt like, this is like, when we talk about in computers, we have this higher order bit and the lower order bit. So if you have like an 8-bit number, you can change the lower bit. It may change the value in terms of 1 or 0. But if you change, let's say, an 8th bit, then it's like 256 or not, right? So the value can be significantly high. And I think in that sense, if we can move the needle on the parental engagement positively, where we make them true partners. I think as a whole, the system will solve for the number one challenge of number one goal of any educational system is achieving the best outcomes for every student. I think it can have very positive impact, and that was one of the motivations for me personally to really take on this mission.
Yeah, I think you talk about utilizing data there. I know. Remember, we were looking at a couple of years ago when you look at a child that only reads while they're in school or for homework at night, right, throughout the school year. So 180 school days you get done, and that child, like, I'm on summer, I'm never reading in. So you compare that child to a child whose parents said, hey, over the summer you're going to read 30 minutes a night, and the increase over, and then once you extract that over time from first grade to second grade to all the way, the difference in amount of reading ability that child is going to have once you've extrapolated that over 7, 8, 10 years is huge, right? So it's that time, right? So if you get parents on your side and you're able to say, hey, this is what you need to do with your child at home at night, even if it's a matter of 30 minutes or an hour of helping them with homework, once you extrapolate that over time, it makes a massive difference to the ability for that child to be successful and for those outcomes.
I think that is so important. And what you both are talking about is that social emotional support of students from their parents, from their teachers, utilizing resources that enable them to be successful. As beings that are growing, they obviously, from the data you're talking about, need that support from us. And it's really good to hear that, because in our busy days and everything that we're doing, we kind of forget sometimes. So it was really good to hear you both say that. I'm going to move on. And this was Chax. This is what you were talking about with Ryan, and some of the communication resources that he uses, how they line up. And then he can go into that more with some of his verbiage that he uses when he talks about communication.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just that, when we were working with our new teachers and really wanting, when our new teachers in our district going through our research to action process, just saying, you want to be aware of what not only your classroom communication plan is. For one, you want to develop a classroom communication plan. You don't just want to wing it. Before you start your school year, develop a plan of how you're going to communicate. And Bloomz has been a big part of that for us here at Alta Mesa. But then you also want to be aware of what is the campus communication plan. So what is the principal doing? What is your grade level doing? And what are the frequency of that? Because we, again, speaking of clarity is really what we're striving for. And clarity limits confusion, clarity limits conflict, and while conflict can be healthy at points, as we don't really want to be in conflict with our parents. And so developing that school-wide communication plan. I help out our district with district communications as well, saying this is what you can expect. And then another aspect of that is really defining what your communication modes are, right? So, down here you have Bloomz, a behavior report, positive parent phone call, parent teacher conference schedules and things like that, classroom newsletter. I do a school newsletter, daily Bloomz reports, and all of those things. So you establish that plan. And then you have to look at each one of those things. So a classroom newsletter, is that a two-way communication or is that a one-way communication? So it's a one-way communication. Here it's information. A positive phone call. Two-way communication, yes, you're talking to the parent, hey, little Billy did this today. I'm so proud of him. Oh my gosh, we're so proud of him too. Behavior report, again, is that two-way communication or one-way communication? And so all of these things you want to be aware of when you're establishing that plan. And I think it might be the next slide or another slide, but for me, kind of the two things that I categorize things at is it consistent communication or is it responsive communication? So consistent communication, I kind of qualify that as it's planned, right? It's consistent. Every Sunday night, my parents at Alta Mesa expect three things. They expect a phone call, an email, and a text message. All of that communication, the phone call, text message, and email, all really has the same information, but I'm just trying to reach them in three different ways, because if a parent doesn't pick up their phone, or if a parent doesn't get text message, or a parent doesn't ever check their email, they're going to get it some other way, but that's consistent communication. This is a parent can expect this every week. Behavior report for a teacher might be consistent communication. You might have come up with a plan with a parent to say, hey, on a daily basis, I'm going to give you a report via Bloomz on how Billy did today in class. So that's consistent. The responsive communication is not necessarily planned communication. This is in response to something. It could be misbehavior at school. It could be positive. It could that's positive parent call, right? You don't plan the positive parent calls necessarily. You don't say, hey, on Wednesday, I'm going to make a positive parent call on this kid. You kind of wait for those opportunities to present themselves, right? So you present, so you have a response to something, and also, sometimes it can be for not so great reasons, right? So notification of a consequence, behavioral update, academic concerns. So I always tell people when I'm talking to teachers is you have your consistent communication. These are the things that you want to plan for in your communication plan. Every week, I'm going to hit it like this. And then you want your responsive communication. So this is what I'm going to do. So, Bloomz is an app we can utilize both of those, right? So you can develop a communication plan. Hey, I'm going to send my newsletter attachment home every week to all my parents. Or you can use it as a responsive communication. Hey, this was the behavior I saw today. I want to send home a behavior report, or I want to send home a positive phone call, or, I want to send home a picture. Look at what Susie did today. This is her spelling test, and she got an A+ on her spelling test. So you're able to celebrate, you're able to communicate both celebrations and maybe some consequences or some not so great things. You're also able to establish, your rapport of your consistent communication.
And before Bloomz, or maybe if you have some historical background, even before you started at Alta Mesa, what were some of the tools that were being used to solve the same problem, and what challenges was that probably causing at that time, for parent participation?
Yeah, so I think a great example of consistent communication for teachers that was probably in place since the creation of Ditto machines was the newsletter, right? You'd make a newsletter, you'd make up copies of that newsletter, and you'd sit it in the student's backpack, and you would send it off, and hope the parents looked at it. Issues with that is kids could throw it away. It could get trampled in the bottom of a backpack. Parents could take it and throw it on the counter and not look at it. You had no idea of whether things were being read or things were being looked at. So there was not that feedback. So a little limited in that two-way communication. Even with that, I would say a lot of people would define newsletters as a one-way communication, but like here at Alta Mesa, we send home digital newsletters. And it is a form of two-way communication because they can always message me afterwards. Hey, I have a question on this. Hey, I noticed this in the newsletter. I'm not really sure about that. Or was this information accurate? But with a paper newsletter, that would go by the wayside. Prior to the invention of email, I think that you were sending home notes home with kids. I always caution, even with email or written notes to parents, I always tell my teachers to think it over for a second, because anything that's written or in email form, it lacks the emoting of a teacher, right? So like if you're communicating with a parent and you have a concern, the parent's always going to look that through their own individual lens and not necessarily through the lens that you are intending it as a teacher. So I always actually encourage my teachers, if there's something that is not super pleasant to share with a parent about their kid, that the first mode that you should attempt to work on that is either in phone or in person. And if you can only connect with that parent via email or text message or a Bloomz message or something like that, then say, hey, I'd love to talk to you on the phone. Can you please give me a call? Because then you can really truly express your concern, and it's not going to be read through that. I mean, I think we've all had those text messages that we get from a friend and you read it and you're like, I'm reading that in a negative way, but I'm not sure that they intended that in a negative way. And I'm always like, I'm just going to give them a phone call. Or if I have a teacher situation where I think, I don't know if that teacher intended it that way, I'm just going to walk down to their classroom and talk to them. It's the same with parent communications, right? If we can have a face-to-face conversation or on the phone conversation, they can hear our voice, they can hear the empathy in our voice, the caring in our voice. It's always going to go further in that situation.
Totally makes sense that, you were inserting a personal touch point along with an effective way to communicate. One question I have, I don't know if you're planning to talk about that, is, obviously this is a very rigorous communication plan. but has that really, particularly the use of tools like Bloomz, have they reduced the time and burden on the teachers while also being consistent and adding kind of the what is it, efficiency and the value of these communications, digital, as you said, like, for example, you can send a newsletter through the backpack, but you don't even have visibility whether somebody has read it or not. So then you cannot build upon that touch point and say, okay, hey, you have read it, so now I can have follow-up conversation on that one. So there is an effectiveness of communication that changing, but also the efficiency part of it. So do you have any data points to talk about? Have these tools affected positively, and are they adding more burden? Are they eliminating burden?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's eliminating burden, because one, you have, and again, it all kind of comes back to your communication plan and how you introduce things to your parents. And at the beginning of our year, we have a large push with our parents to say, your responsibilities post parent-teacher conference, not parent-teacher conference, back to school night, is to sign up for Bloomz. Then we have those data points. Okay, here are the 20 of my 24 parents have signed up for Bloomz. Okay, how do we engage those other 4 parents to make sure they're signed up? And then we really push hard on that, because once that's there, then that becomes the teacher's entire communication kind of network, right? They can push everything out there. They can push my newsletter. I mean, that's what my teachers, when I push out a newsletter to them, they immediately push it out there to their parents via Bloomz. So the redundancy for me helps out a lot, right? So if they're not getting it from me on a text message, a phone call, or an email, they're going to get it through Bloomz as well for my teachers. And then you have your entire parent list inventoried, also to a point where they can see, like, on there, was that read, was that not read? And again, as an administrator, reflecting on that clarity piece, also documentation is my best friend, right? So if we're having a conversation with a parent about some challenging things, and the parent says, I had no idea this was going on, one of the first things I said is, well, are you communicating with the teacher via Bloomz? Yeah, but I had no idea. Oh, really? Well, we have the documentation of everything, all the exchanges between the teacher and you right here. And the teacher clearly expresses some concern, and you guys arranged a phone call that happened on this date and things like that. So I really love the documentation piece of it as well. And then the ability for our teachers to instantaneously send things, whether it's to a group of parents or to an individual parent, on what's happening in the class. And then as they go throughout the day, the ease of which they can, we have it up on the board. All of our classrooms have InterWrite boards or smart boards. And so, it's become also, beyond just the communication plan, it also has become an aspect of the classroom management plan, because they're able to give that instantaneous feedback about the student behavior. And it's become a part of, like, okay, we're going to take a Bloomz break right here. And I think that all 26 of you guys have earned a point and, levels up, or, hey, this group over here, group 5, you guys did a really good job. So you guys are going to get a point and move forward. So it's not only become a part of the communication plan, but it's become a part of the classroom management plan as well, to integrate that communication tool in what teachers are doing. So yeah, absolutely. It's expedited, and made efficient our communication with parents, where a teacher doesn't have to dive into the email and not sure if the parent's using this email, or find the phone number, everything. It's kind of all in one location.
One aspect, again, because along the way, at least particularly when my child was going through a Montessori school, one aspect that they put a lot of emphasis on was the parent education. It's not just only communication with the parent, but also educating parents along the way of the way that they can really support the child, or, like, sometimes they don't know what resources are available to support their kids. So is that something that you do as well? And is that something your teachers take on?
Yeah. So our teachers we have, well, so there's always the context of the pandemic versus pre-pandemic, and so right now schools are limited in some of those areas of offering extra things. But prior to the pandemic, I mean, that was definitely an entire district strategy of how can we engage parents and give parents opportunities for extension, for parenting resources, parenting classes. If you were looking for things to do with your child above and beyond what the school was doing, and we would utilize our communication platform to do that, and come up with creative ways to engage our community and our parent community specifically.
When I was talking with you yesterday, Ryan, I really liked some points that you made about the responsibility on the parent too. That you are expecting the parent to engage in these, and so how do you handle that when you talked about parents that are like, oh, I didn't know, but what about those parents that just haven't engaged so far?
Yeah, I mean, so that's where the front end push really is, and where you have to be unified as a school community, and a teacher team, to really push and engage with your parents. I mean, really for us, like I said, we see them as an extension of the school, right? Your job is to continue to educate your child at home. And so we make every effort to make sure that our parents are signing up for Bloomz, even to the point where, phone calls are being made. It kind of all starts at the beginning of the year. We have an open house, not open house, but it's before back to school night. We open our entire campus for kids to come in and meet their teachers, and we're handing out Bloomz paperwork. Then, hey, this is how you sign up for Bloomz. Back to school night, we're handing it out again. We're checking in what's our ratio right now of parents that are signed up for Bloomz. How can we reach those other kids? Send it in the backpack. We're very fortunate here at our school, kind of a small community school, so a lot of the neighborhoods around our school, and every teacher walks their class out, walks their kids out to hand off to the parents. And so when the teachers are out there, hey, I noticed you haven't signed up for Bloomz yet. When I talk to parents, the number one thing I say is, have you signed up for Bloomz? First question is, if they say, I'm not getting any information from the school, have you signed up for Bloomz? Oh, no, I haven't done that yet. Okay, we need to get you signed up for Bloomz. That's the number one way the teacher is going to communicate. That is our communication system. We have, as a school, we adopted that. Even actually prior to me arriving at Alta Mesa, it was adopted by the teachers to say, this is what not one person's going to use, or this grade level, this is what everybody's going to use. So it's consistent from grade levels to transition to transition to transition, to say, this is what we're going to use. And so, I mean, I would say parents are bombarded by it. Are we 100% on our parents signed up? No, I don't know that you're ever necessarily going to be 100%, but we're pretty close. And for a Title I school that has a fairly high percentage of free and reduced lunch, our percentage of parent participation is pretty high. And that just comes from the fact that if you've been at Alta Mesa for 3 years, you've had 3 different teachers bombard you with like, hey, this is what we do to communicate. We utilize this. And so it's kind of handy, because it's not one of those things that we change it every year. So the parents are complaining, well, we did this last year, but we're using something different this year, and next year's gonna be something that's like, nope, it's the same thing every single year. Same deal, and so there's really no excuse.
Max, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think one point that that is also something that you touched upon that's very important is that as the penetration of lots of free apps, including Bloomz, there is a free app for Bloomz. I think that's how your teachers discovered Bloomz to start with. But I think, you touched upon the importance of some kind of unification, standardization of a platform of choice by the schools and by potentially the district on one thing that all the teachers are going to use. Because I think the value of that one unified platform, if you can maybe, I don't know if you have the data points to talk about, but like when you have each teacher using different apps versus having one unified platform, could you touch upon the importance? I think that's something that we believe strongly in. That's where we've started from the classroom, but we've enhanced the capabilities so that a school can standardize, a district even can standardize. But I would like to hear from an administration perspective, the importance of that unification of the platform, so that you can, I think you touched upon the unifying the community. How can a unified platform help you in that mission and eliminate the frustration and potentially all these in between the gaps where parents are dropping off because there's a lack of communication and so on. So would you like to touch upon that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we all, and I'm a parent as well, and we all would love to think that we have the highest level of motivation to get in there and find out everything that's happening at school. But the reality is we're all working, we're all living lives. And so when you have 5, 6 different modes of communication that a parent has to go out necessarily and do something to get that communication or be active. And the odds are you're going to start losing people. And in schools, even as small as Alta Mesa, which is about 300 students, you're always talking about the aggregate, right? You're always talking about like the large percentage of folks that you can reach. And when you use 3 different modes of communication that are all 3 different apps or whatever you want to do, you're adding to the workload of those parents. And I would say that like my wife and I are pretty, I would say decently high performers and would, be, but even then, if it took me 3 or 4 steps to figure out, I might not do it. I might not go through the pain of finding that out. And depending on where you're at in life, you might have different things be roadblocks. Well, then you extrapolate that to your parents, and are your parents necessarily going to be doing that, right? If you're making it hard for them, if you're making them work to find out that communication, that's not really how it's supposed to be. So for me, it's all, what's the easiest mode of operation, right? What's the easiest thing you can do? Hey, if you, text this number or sign up this way or download this app that's free, boom, that's easy. It takes you, less than 15 seconds to do every year. And then everything after that is just them being able to hit a button and look at what's happening in schools. So you want to make it as easy as possible, and you want to make it as consistent as possible. So maybe the first year that they weren't on Bloomz or weren't very active on Bloomz, but they got hit with the second year. Okay, maybe I guess I should probably do this Bloomz thing. Okay, well, the third year, okay, well, now I'm definitely getting hit with it again. Whereas if you do this system to that system to another system, they're not going to do it. And, for me as a school-wide communication, my communications go to the parents, right? So they sign up via, our parent information system, which is Power School. And then I have all their information and I send all that out to them. And our teachers are hitting them with Bloomz. So it's very little work on the parent side to be able to attain the information. And that's really what you have to do. You have to make it easy for parents so that it doesn't, because our job is not to create roadblocks. Our job is not to require, parents are already got a million things going on. So we want to make sure that the communication, to access communication, there is no boundary, there is no walls, there is no roadblocks, there's no speed bumps. You can access that communication, whether you have a smartphone or computer, you can have that, you can access that information.
Yeah, I think very nicely summarized. Easy, eliminating the roadblocks and making it extremely simple with the access to the information. So
what stories do you have? Because I know you've talked about your teachers loving Bloomz. What stories do you have of the usage over these 3 years that you've worked with Bloomz? What are you hearing from parents and teachers with the use of this program?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a really positive response from both our teachers and our parents. I hear a lot of conversations. I'll even hear conversations coming to the office. Hey, I got this. I was a little concerned because so and so, student. My daughter didn't get her Bloomz points for the day. Is there anything I can do? And my first thing is like, well, I think you need to reference the teacher because I'm not really aware of what the specific Bloomz points is for a third grade classroom, or things like, hey. I messaged out my teachers, if there was something, or messaged out my parents, if there was something like, hey guys, we really need to get this information out there fast. I'm going to give it out as an all call, but can you put this out there? The nice thing about it is if I do an all call as a principal, I know the message got out there, but I don't actually necessarily know how many folks got it. But when I tell my teachers, hey, can you put this out on your Bloomz message and let me know what the percentage of folks that opened it and read it was, that gives me some feedback. And you guys were talking earlier about data points. That's a really nice thing about Bloomz is it gives data points. Like, hey, I'll send out an email, hey, teachers, please send this out and let me know how many of your parents either respond or read it. And so I'll get back, 20 of my 24 parents read this message. So, okay, I know that message is getting out there. Okay, 12 of my 20 teachers respond to this message and they're able to volunteer some time for this event or that event. And so it makes it to where I have a little bit more information and data to work off of, like, okay, the message is getting out there so that when we have an event or when an important message needs to get out there, that we're able to get it. And kind of one thing that we haven't really touched upon is the importance of communication during the pandemic. I mean, we kind of had a huge shift in education that happened 18 months ago that required schools and school districts to 100% reevaluate what their communication systems were. even in our school districts, I think was doing a pretty good job of school communication. We had to completely revamp what our communication system was during the pandemic, because all of a sudden we needed to get out a message to parents like, hey, you're going all virtual, and utilizing Bloomz and things like that in a virtual sense. I mean, we're a district that has invested heavily in Google as our learning management, our LMS. And, but then that is one form of how we push information out and how we teach kids. But then there was the communication aspect of it. So again, our school, I think, benefited heavily from having an established tradition of having Bloomz as our messaging system to be able to send out feedback during distance learning or during times where we weren't able to see or meet with our kids one-on-one. As a district, we were really fortunate that we didn't have to stay in distance learning beyond or for as long as many other places in California and many places in the country. But I think we weathered that storm a little bit more easily while we were in distance learning, because we were able to have a communication system in place that worked. But again, that is another reason where you really had to think about, how are you managing communication? How are you making sure that your parents are getting the message? Because on a daily basis, things are changing. We're requiring, one week you could not require masks, and the next week, oh no, we are going to be requiring masks. And one week we're not going to be testing students, and now, oh yeah, we are going to be COVID testing students. And we had to get that information out very quickly. And it was always very dynamic. And that's a big piece of it is communication is a dynamic thing. It's never stagnant. You're always, you're always needing to keep things relevant, but also get that information out there as soon as possible and make sure that your parents have received that message.
And Ryan, are your parents able to go into the schools yet?
In a limited sense. So we are able to have parent volunteers on our campus if they're either vaccinated or if they have a COVID test within 72 hours of being in the classroom. So, it definitely creates a little bit of a roadblock for our parents to be on campus, but they are able to be on campus. They're able to be on campus for, outdoor events and things like sports, but for volunteering in the classroom. And that was a big hit for us at Alta Mesa. We prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of parents and a lot of folks on our campus volunteering in the classroom. Again, it's that idea of a community school. We want to bring people in. We don't want people to feel that they should not be involved in their kids' education. We want to bring them in. So that was kind of one of the biggest hits for us, was not being able to welcome folks in. So again, utilizing communication platforms and what we had start to grow into as a district and as a school, YouTube as a platform, and Bloomz and text message updates and things like that. We were able to try to create keep the culture as positive as it could be in a time where people weren't able to come on campus.
My next question, if you don't mind, Chax, is do you see you stepping backwards or releasing some of this communication that you've been doing so much of during COVID? In effect, it's been highlighted and expected more so in the last 2 years than it was before. So what is it going to look like in the next year when or if COVID does become, more relaxed? Like, how is communication going to change? And is it going to keep going forward the way that you have it set with so much communication, or will there be a relaxation of it? If you understand what I'm asking, I want to, how is it going to look?
Was that for me or was that for?
That is for you, because you do so much, Ryan. You do so much communication. So is it going to stay the same in the next year? You've been on the communication, train. How is it going to look when parents are starting to come back, when things do start to relax? What is that going to look like? What's that going to look like? And because you're seeing the benefits of this engaged communication. So how do we transition into our normal world again?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's been a conversation we've had at our district level is, through the pandemic, and especially last year, and I remember having a conversation with our superintendent about, what are the what are the silver linings we can take to a pandemic like this? And there's not a ton of silver linings to a pandemic, but a couple of things is that it forced us really to look at, step up, and improve in the area of communication. And I think that do I think communication will take a step back? Maybe in certain areas, and maybe frequency, I could see things kind of like, kind of ebbing a little bit back, because the dynamics might not need, a weekly communication from a district or something like that, but because, things aren't changing as like rapidly as they were for a few months there. But I don't think the systems that we are putting in place will change ever. I think it really forced districts to say, we have to be transparent. We have to be completely open. We need people to be able to see what's happening at school without actually being at school. And what that did is, I think, kind of opened up a world for parents that weren't going to be at the school anyway. Because again, your percentage of parents that are going to volunteer in a classroom or swing by the school is not going to be probably 90% of your parents or 60% of your parents. It's probably going to be like 15% of your parents are going to come by and maybe volunteer in a classroom or swing by the school. But now with different communication systems, we've opened it up to where we're kind of saying, hey, here's what we're doing to a larger majority of parents. And so I think that element will continue on after. I think some of the systems we've developed, we're not going to regress back into the age of like, okay, we're doing a paper newsletter and we're not really communicating. So a lot of those elements, I think that we've been able to step up in, have been areas that I don't think will go away, because I think we've seen the benefit of it, and we've seen the benefit of transparency, consistent communication, access to teachers, and be able to message them through the day, or even at the end of the day. I think there's another conversation, a whole different conversation about how to appropriately build boundaries around communication sometimes for our teachers, because I think the access has become so easy that we also have parents sometimes have an expectation that there is no boundaries around communication, which, again, you can ask my wife. I'm pretty bad at the boundaries around communication. If I get an email at 9 o'clock at night, I'd rather just reply to it than say, that can wait for the morning. But ultimately, if you can create a system like we've done, through the pandemic, and many school districts have had to do during the pandemic, I think it would be ill-advised to step back into an archaic system that you had prior to. Again, are you going to need to maybe communicate as much as you have in the past? Maybe not. I remember when I stepped in here at Alta Mesa, the system was they would put out a newsletter once a month that was a PDF, and it was just sent out via email. I changed that to once a week through the pandemic, because I said parents need to know, have more up-to-date information. And so we're going to make that a dynamic newsletter. We're going to make it essentially it's a newsletter that can be changed and augmented through the week, but it's always there, and we're pushing that out, and our teachers are pushing out through Bloomz. But I don't ever foresee myself moving back, and our district probably won't.
So one thing I just wanted to make sure we touch upon, you said like the importance of drawing the boundaries between the times when the teachers having access to this highway street between the parents and families and the teachers can sometimes be a challenge. But, I know that in Bloomz, one of the ways we help teachers manage that is through the quiet hours, and there's ways in which you can set the expectation. Is that something that has been helpful in the process of at least creating that separation between, access, but at the same time boundaries?
Yeah, I think so. It's all also in utilizing those tools and things like that. And I think our teachers definitely have created and used some of those tools to create those boundaries. And then some of them, I think it's probably more conversation with the individual teacher to say, you should create these boundaries. I know sometimes it's easier not to, and just say, hey, I'm just gonna, somebody messaged me at 9 o'clock at night, I'm gonna answer it back. That's a part of growing as a teacher, and being able to say, yep, there's a time and place for that, and I need to put the phone down, or I need to put the access down for a little bit. But those tools definitely are utilized.
Excellent. And maybe one question I wanted you to touch upon is any data that you have seen. I think in terms of I know there's one holy grail data point, which is are there actual improvements to the student achievement because of technologies like Bloomz that has really transformed your school over years? So that's kind of one, if you have any data point there. If not, then Are there next level data points in terms of the percentage of the parent participation that has gone up compared to over the years past and now? So any of those trends or data points that will help at least the listeners to understand that, there is actual benefit of these technologies, not just feel good, maybe logical value, but also are there actual data points that could be presented here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, in my 3 years here at Altamesa. So the first thing that I would qualify, we'll talk about academic achievement. That's a tough one just because in the 3 years, my first year here at Altamesa was 2019-20. So that year ended in a third of the year being lost to the pandemic. So we're kind of in this era right now of learning loss and trying to, how do we mitigate learning loss? But, and again, an element of that to kind of bring around to positive is that's where communication's more important than ever, is mitigating learning loss and being able to communicate, hey, this is where we're at. This is why we need you to be involved. These are the things that we're doing at the school. So again, utilizing tools like Bloomz on behavior management and feedback and scheduling our conferences to make sure that we have a high percentage of our parents participating in parent-teacher conferences. That's one of the most fruitful times for a teacher and a parent is being able to sit down for 30 minutes and talk about where we are, what we've done, and where we're going with a student. So that to me is a little bit of it's anecdotal data because we've definitely had an increase of our parents' ability to access things like parent-teacher conference and our teachers' ability to get those things scheduled. And then I think overall the second point was parent response, and we've really over the time that Bloomz has been used, the report I get back from teachers is that they have more parents participating by signing up through Bloomz than they ever had prior to. So the ability to have 80 to 85% of your parents being able to sign up for Bloomz, hey, that's 80 to 85% of your parents that are at least going to get a message that the message is going to get out there. And then maybe it's unread, maybe it got there, but at least they have access to a message, and that's a big piece for me as a site administrator, is that our teachers are able to get their message out there and able to communicate that effectively. And so, especially when you're at a school like mine, which is, in a Title I school, and a school that has a pretty high percentage of free and reduced lunch and things like that, to be able to access that many parents is a huge accomplishment for our teachers.
Are there any questions that you want to get from the audience?
Let me look and see if we have any questions.
While we're waiting, one other question, because you are a Title I school, you probably have diverse populations with people with different language backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So one thing that, again, from Bloom's perspective, that we've put a lot of emphasis is that ability to translate and make the communication easily accessible in different languages. We support up to 108 or 9 languages now, and that list continuously grows. So how that has that played a big role in the value that Bloomz delivers for your community?
Yeah, I've heard feedback from some of our families because it's interesting at our school, and just our position within California, up here in Northern California, is I don't have a massive population of English learners, but the population of English learners that I have an incredibly diverse amount of languages spoken. So, in California, oftentimes, you'll see, especially in Southern and Central California, a lot of Spanish speakers. We definitely have a percentage of Spanish speakers, in my school, but then we have a host of other Mandarin and things like that go to our school. So to have that ability for those parents to be able to access that is huge.
That's great.
Well, wonderful. I don't have any other questions from the group here, so I am very happy to have you here, Ryan. You spoke quite a bit about your experience and background and your passion in communication, which is exactly what Bloomz is working to do, is to help successful communication between families and schools. And, every day we're striving to do that. And it's really nice for you to be able to utilize Bloomz with your teachers, with that engagement and that communication. And we look forward to more experiences with you. And we have more features coming up that are going to be even better as Bloom grows and gets better. So thank you so much for being here, Ryan. Chax, as always, it's so good to hear you speak and hear your experiences and why you founded and brought Bloomz to life, really. And he keeps striving to meet all of your needs from the, especially at administrative level and district level. So thank you so much. And those of you that joined us, thank you so much for being here for our third webinar in the series. And we look forward to more in the next year. Have a great 2022 and enjoy your break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much.
See you guys.